Hey everybody, I want to be relaxed with this one. Hey there. Shut up. Okay. Why hello. I'm Mariam, and this is my segment where credit is due for Horror DNA. Why am I doing this? Because the internet, it's full of reviews, and I think we all can tell what we like, what we don't like, but I know a lot of really great filmmakers, whether they're independent filmmakers or, more established ones. And to be honest with you, filmmaking is never easy. It's always a challenge. So I want to do a segment that's all about how filmmakers overcome obstacles and manage to make a film. Because my God, it's hard. My God, it's hard. I am going to meme it first. So today we're actually not looking at a feature film at all. We're looking at a series, namely Creepshow. More specifically, season 2. I was extremely lucky that I got the opportunity to interview Greg Nicotero and Dana Gould. Greg Nicotero was one of the executive producers and the primary director for Creepshow season 2, and Dana Gould wrote the screenplay for the final episode of the season. So before we get into the interview itself, let's take a look at Greg Nicotero. He's a legend, okay, so look him up. So Greg Nicotero started his career doing special effects makeup on Day of the Dead for Romero and Savini, and now he is the primary director and executive producer and special effects makeup artist on The Walking Dead. So that's pretty cool. And now let's take a look at Dana. Dana Gould is a comedian and writer who most notably has worked as a producer and writer for The Simpsons. So what is Creepshow? The first Creepshow film was an anthology that was released in 1982. It was directed by George Romero and written by Stephen King. As a matter of fact, it was Stephen King's screenwriting debut. It was later adapted into a comic illustrated by Bernie Wrightson, who had drawn influence from the 1950s EC comics. Later, they released another 2 sequel films, and then after a long break in 2019, it was brought back as a series, produced by Greg Nicotero. Season 2 is only just released, and Season 3 is currently in production. You'd think with those names attached and a project, a film as known as Creepshow in the horror community, it would be a cakewalk to get this series produced. And you'd be wrong. And that is exactly what we're looking at today. So one of the first things that Greg mentioned was that before producing season 1, he was actually pretty terrified. He said the expectations were high. Creepshow being a known brand kind of made it even harder, hitting the mark when it came to pleasing some of those hardcore horror fans, and specifically Creepshow fans. Greg says, quote, "When we did season 1, I felt the weight and the expectation of every fan of the original Creepshow. It was a little terrifying, I'll be really honest. But coming out of it and coming into season 2, I felt for me the development process was so much more rewarding. I'm super excited and very proud of the work the team has put together." Ultimately, he explained that the team was really great. He really could rely on them. It made the process very rewarding. And when it came to producing season 2, it was a lot more relaxed. He was really happy with how things went, and he was really proud to be working with a very strong team. And now let's look at the finale specifically. When it came to choosing the subject matter, Dana knew that he wanted to take an old film, do an homage sort of thing, and do some cool black and white scenes that were really a nod to classic horror, but a lot of the ideas were really tough to sell. He specifically said that creating a whole episode in black and white, which was originally what he wanted, would just not be accepted. So he had to sit down and give it some more thought. Dana explains, quote, "I thought it would be very, very hard to sell a black and white episode. So that took out doing the whole episode in Night of the Living Dead." Once the concept went through and he knew he could make it happen, they were looking at what films to use in order to create that homage. And what do? You jump on the internet. What is public domain? And that's kind of where some of the problems started, because as a matter of fact, a lot of films that are listed as public domain technically aren't public domain. So they kind of set the whole thing up and only realized later that they were going to have some issues. As a matter of fact, the rights became so much of an obstacle, if you will, that even the posters that Greg privately owned, if he wanted to hang one up in the background, again, to pay homage to these films, he needed to acquire the rights for this poster. Greg tells us, quote, "When Justin is in his den and he points to the Horror Express poster, that's my poster from my movie poster collection." And they were like, we gotta get permission to use the poster. The next issue, of course, as with most projects, was a budget issue. You would think a project of this size would have a very, very large budget. The truth is, it didn't at all. Greg was explaining that they had a budget of $500,000 per episode. Now, to all my indie filmmaker friends, I know that sounds like a lot. I know some of you dream of a number that size, but when talking about high production value films with big sets and big crew, the lower end of the scale for a 90-minute movie is about $1 to $2 million. So the idea that an episode that's over 40 minutes long only gets 500,000 shows that you're really at the lower end of the scale for a project that needs these sort of means. Quote, "If I asked for a roll of duct tape or some rubber bands, I felt guilty. I felt guilty asking for more than a 12-foot wall because I knew the art department wouldn't be able to do it, and they did such a great job." Greg was saying that working with the budget they had meant that a lot of this was, again, the team pulling together, and it was done purely based on the sheer will of everyone wanting to make it happen, cutting corners and being clever with the budget wherever they could. One of the most impressive things in light of these budgetary restrictions is that they still managed to recreate sets from these original films. As a matter of fact, the living room that you see Justin Long in, that is supposed to be the living room from Night of the Living Dead, was a complete recreation. Quote, "We recreated the living room scene. We recreated the set from Night of the Living Dead. I had goosebumps. I felt for a minute there like I was working on the original Night of the Living Dead. It really sort of rocked my world." And then moving on in the direction of these old original films that they were using, they had a little bit of an issue when it came to the actress from Horror Express, because they wanted the character to do some things in their episode that she didn't do in the film. So how are they going to make that happen? Well, as a matter of fact, they ended up hiring Hannah Fierman as a body double. Now, Hannah Fierman, you may know from films like VHS or Siren, which was a result of her role in VHS. You may also know her from American Hell or Dead by Midnight. Greg was saying that she did such a fantastic job and he felt so bad that she was really only there for a body double, that we'll be seeing her as a more relevant character in season 3, so that's something to look forward to. Now, for those of you who have already seen any of the episodes of the Creepshow series, you'll know that there's a very interesting balance between horror and comedy. Dana actually revealed that getting that balance is so difficult to get right when it comes to the screenplay itself, that it's really important to make sure your casting choices are correct, because the right actors can actually ad-lib a lot of it, and that's where a lot of the organic humor and the intricacies come from when it comes to these off the bat quick, humorous punchlines. Dana says, quote, "The interaction between Justin and Darcy and the film is, in every instance, so much more sophisticated and intricate than I envisioned or put into the script. The funniest interaction was not in the script." But then, of course, another obstacle that is definitely worth mentioning when we talk about any genre that pushes the boundaries is the sensitivity of many people in the audience these days. There has definitely been a social evolution as of late, and both Greg and Dana agreed that it's really important to keep a really positive attitude when it comes to embracing this evolution. For a lot of horror content creators and comedians, this heightened awareness of the audience can be seen as a true obstacle. However, Greg and Dana saw it as an opportunity rather than a burden. Dana explains, quote, "The original EC comics, all those stories were morality tales. Somebody does something shitty and they get their comeuppance. It's a common theme in horror and satire. And that lends itself to Creepshow. As we are now in this era of, like in the late 60s, social evolution, we're growing and changing. And growing and changing is painful and uncomfortable and scary. The beautiful thing about these stories is the heightened awareness isn't a burden, it's an opportunity. Now we have an entirely new canvas to explore. The challenges are good and there to be welcomed. The beautiful thing about shows like Creepshow that are anthologies that can go anywhere in any episode is that you get to explore these things. Greg says, the landscape is changing and it's changing fast and dramatically. It's going to be challenging in how you craft these villains in horror stories. In order to make someone villainous and despicable in about 6 minutes, there were times when you would go right to the worst possible thing that you could think of for them to do. I think in this particular landscape, there is a lot more sensitivity now. There are movies that could not be made now the way they were years ago. We try to be relevant and topical about some of our themes and some of our stories. We've handled stories about abuse and racism in episodes of Creepshow this year. If you don't watch the news and you don't want to be spoon-fed certain agendas, I really believe the horror genre probably addresses elements in a way that people don't feel they're being force-fed. We have a responsibility to continue being socially relevant in terms of the stories that we tell. You know we have to obviously be mindful, but it's challenging. The horror genre is built on rebellion and social unrest. We have an obligation to tell relevant stories, and I'm happy to do it. All in all, I think when we hear a name like Creepshow, or names like Dana Gould and Greg Nicotero and the projects that they've worked on, we have a really high expectancy that things have to be absolutely perfect. We expect it to be a success. We expect it to be a done deal. And we might be even harsher critics for established professionals than we are for independent content creators. But the fact of the matter is, no matter what level of filmmaking you're on, there's always going to be obstacles. It's always going to be hard. And that's why we need to talk about it. And with that, I am officially giving credit where credit is due. To all the cast and crew members of Creepshow, well done. And if you want to catch season 2 of Creepshow, you'll find it. You will find it. Jeez, and if you want to catch season 2 of Creepshow, you will find it on Shudder. That's all from me for now. I am Mariam, and I will see you next time when once again credit is due. Feels so cheesy. And then I'll do a little dance. That's it.
I'm Mariam. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm Mariam. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm Mariam. Like, comment, subscribe.